Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone. For this week's episode, I want to talk about knowing and updating your financial position. Now, a few episodes back, if you listened to it, it was episode 32. I talked about, do you know your financial position and how that can essentially work for you? Well, I want to dive into that a little bit more, specifically talking about this time of year. Now, as I record this, we're talking about like post-harvest, beginning to middle of Q4 timeframe. And essentially, I think this is the time of year where our balance sheets are changing. Now, as we go throughout the year and we operate, depending on your business, your operation, whatever that looks like, our balance sheets are always going to be changing. They're constantly moving because our businesses are constantly moving. Now, what do I mean by balance sheets are constantly changing? Basically, to keep this really simple, is I'm talking about your assets and your liabilities. That's essentially what makes up your balance sheet. And so that's why I want to talk about, yes, they are constantly changing, which is why I think people sometimes have a hard time actually tracking them, because it makes it kind of cumbersome to actually stay on top of something that's kind of a moving target or a moving number, so to speak. So that's why I think a good way to kind of wrap your mind around this, especially this time of year, I think our balance sheets, the term that I want to kind of use is are rolling over. Our balance sheets are rolling over in that a lot of things are changing. A lot of things are going to be either added, subtracted, or updated. And that's why I think it's important to kind of discuss some of this, because this is the time of year where a lot of things change. We're harvesting a crop, but we're also prepaying expenses. Things are changing, and we need to do our best to stay on top of these numbers. So I want to ask you, in your operation, in your business, whatever that consists of, whether your row crops, cattle, livestock, maybe some sort of other ag business, in your operation, what do things currently look like? All right, I'm going to kind of dive into this. Say you have a row crop operation. Well, most likely you are getting close to wrapping up with harvest, or you have wrapped up with harvest. So you have a crop that you harvested, whether that be corn, soybeans, wheat, maybe you've got some alfalfa. That's strictly for, selling on a row crop sort of standpoint. So you got the crop that you've harvested. Maybe you've done some custom work for the neighbor. Maybe you did some custom combine, or you hauled some grain to town for the neighbor, or you helped people out. You did some custom work. So you're trying to calculate up some of your different accounts receivable, accounts that are going to be receivable to you that you're going to be paid for. Or, as you've harvested your crop, maybe you've sold some grain. Maybe you've taken some to the town, to the elevator, and you went ahead and you sold that grain. So that came into your account. So there's that could have been happening. Also, along that same lines, is you're kind of working on your marketing plan for this year's crop. Maybe you've got majority of your crop in the bins, so you're trying to figure out when you're going to be marketing that crop, maybe the different time of year that's going to be coming in. Maybe you've actually sold some and it's on deferred payment. Those are some other things we can keep in mind. Now, the other thing here is that we also need to kind of keep track of those that I've mentioned so far, or maybe on the asset side of things. We also kind of need to keep track of the liabilities. Maybe you've racked up some pretty big repair bills. Some pretty big repair bills at, Mother Deere or Case IH, or maybe you're just your local repairman, repair shop. Maybe you've racked up some pretty good bills. Those would be accounts payable. You've also, maybe some neighbors have helped you during harvest, whether that be physical labor, or they were the ones that brought over a semi, brought over the grain cart that helped you take out the crop. Maybe you broke down, they helped out. So they have helped you. So that kind of goes along the same token of accounts payable. Now, the other thing that we could be looking at doing this time of year is starting to prepay expenses for next year. Looking at, inputs such as seed or chemical or fertilizer. This is kind of the time of year where we start looking at some of those things. It can be pretty advantageous for our operation to do those this time of year, but that can really change how we kind of manage where our money flows and where it goes. So to kind of switch this to maybe like a cattle or a livestock operation, just so you kind of get a grasp as to what that looks like. Think about what you've been doing here recently. If you're maybe a cow-calf operation, maybe you've weaned calves or even potentially sold your calves. Maybe you've chopped silage. You finished up putting your alfalfa up, so you know what you have for inventory on alfalfa. Maybe you've got a feedlot operation, so you've shipped a group of calves, or you've shipped several group of calves. You've purchased calves. A lot can be changing there. Or maybe you also did some custom work. Maybe you did some custom chopping, or you brought over your silage truck and helped a few different neighbors chop silage for a couple weeks. That goes back to the accounts receivable. And so the other thing there is maybe you've also preg checked some cows or some heifers. You can kind of confirm which ones are bred, which ones are going to be maybe shipped down the road because they're open, or you've also maybe purchased some alfalfa or some hay. So there's things there that would be on the liability side of things now. There would be some things that you need to update there, whether that be accounts payable, or maybe you have paid that already. You need to keep track of that on inventory. That would be another asset there. So we can also keep track of that. Or, once again, talking about maybe purchasing some calves. You bought another pen of cattle, bought some maybe breeding heifers. You purchased something there to help out your operation. This can also be, I mentioned that row crop and cattle. Those are two kind of sectors of the ag industry that I'm very familiar with. But this is the same for any business, any general business, whether it be an ag business, maybe a construction business, whatever that is. We just kind of need to keep track of basically these assets and liabilities. And I'm talking, once again here, accounts payable and accounts receivable. Maybe you've taken in some cash, so you paid down your operating note, paid down some term debt. You need to kind of basically keep these numbers updated as we go. Now, how do we do that? How do we actually update these numbers, and how do we stay organized? Well, it kind of all depends on you and your habits and your personality, who you have on your team, maybe who helps you keep track of all this stuff. Now, one way or another, you got to find something, a system and process that works for you. You've got to find a way to basically keep track of all these important things such as maybe our inventories. Inventories can be very broad, so inventories such as maybe cattle, cows, feed, hay, grain, all of those things we need to keep track of inventory on. Same for like going back to a business of some sorts. Maybe you have an ag retail business. You need to keep track of all your inventory that you have on hand, because that's going to be a pretty big asset that we need to keep track of. So, some sort of either spreadsheet, or for us, sometimes it's just simply jotting down in a notes app what we've harvested for alfalfa, what we have. And then, going back to the grain side of things, a tool that we have, kind of a quick little side note, is we've got basically a Libra grain cart scale on our grain cart. And what this is keep track of all of our inventory, everything that we've harvested production-wise from all of our different fields. And then I can take that, put that into a spreadsheet, and really make it adaptable. Within our operation, we actually have, basically me, my dad, and then our main entity, Russ Camp Farms. So I can kind of break that down into each individual, basically, entity, but I can break that down into an ownership format so I know exactly who has what. And so just kind of a side note there, just try to find some sort of tools to keep track of your inventory. Same for cattle. If you've got maybe a running inventory sheet that you can kind of basically keep track of exactly what you have on hand. And that's going to make this a lot easier to update. And so the other thing there is when it comes to custom work that you've maybe done for others, that would be accounts receivable. Maybe just make a notes app. Every time you've done something new for somebody, we in our operation, we do some custom drilling. So every time I go out there, I'll try to basically keep track of, what day it is, what acres we've done. We are actually providing some of the seed there. So how many pounds of seed? What does that actually look like? Just try to write all this stuff down. Try to keep it in one place as best as you can so you can easily come back and reference that. So that way you can maybe use all that information. For us, we kind of, like I said, kind of go back to the notes app on my phone. I will try to jot it down there, or maybe have one central notebook in the tractor that we can write stuff down in. And then I'll take all that information and then I'll throw it into a spreadsheet that I can easily organize and kind of use that to calculate everything that I need to keep track of, all my acres and all of the basically accounts receivable information. So to kind of go alongside of that, basically the opposite there, custom work done for you, somebody that has helped you. Now, some cases that might be them keeping track of it, but you also would be, in your best interest to keep track of that as well. So once again, that might just be simply jotting this stuff down in your phone or in a notebook, just so we can keep track of that accounts payable. That's work that's done for you. That's accounts payable. Now, the one thing that I'll say here is a quote that I was trying to think of here is essentially, if it comes in or out of your account, it needs to be accounted for. So, and I want to say this again, if it comes in or out of your account, it needs to be accounted for. And that's ultimately why we call this a balance sheet. So if you've got work that you've done, maybe you've done some custom work, quite a bit of custom work that you've done for somebody, ultimately that's going to be, you got fuel, you've got time, you've got all of your inputs that go into that. That's going to be coming out of, say, your operating note. That's going to be coming out of your account to pay for those different things. Well, we have to have something to balance that off, or to balance that liability. So in this case, we're going to add in an accounts receivable onto the asset column. And so that's going to balance that out. That's why we call this a balance sheet. And the other thing would be there to kind of go back to either the row crop side or the cattle side of things. You can use either one. But say for the row crop side of things, throughout the entire crop that we just harvested, we've put inputs into this crop. We've bought chemicals, we've bought fertilizer, we've bought seed, we've maybe paid somebody to custom harvest that. All of that has come off of basically our liability side, or it's going to basically add to our liability because we've used an operating note to pay for that. And so that's going to basically look like a negative because it's adding to our liability. So we need to offset that with basically an investment into crops. That's why this time of year, I feel like things are actually rolling over. That's to kind of bring this full circle here, is that's why things are rolling over, because we might have a pretty big investment into crops category that now needs to be turned into basically taking that off. If you've harvested your crop, you no longer have this investment in crops, you can take that off as an asset, and you're going to add the asset of the physical crop itself. Or if you've sold that crop, so you harvested it, sold it right off the combine, that cash that you've collected from that sale of the grain, that's going to be going into your account. And that's going to be essentially going to be balancing out. So I kind of hope you're following here, but that's why we call this a balance sheet, is because everything needs to balance. So that's a note there as to why we are going to be doing this. Now, another reason why we need to go through all this work to kind of keep track of all this stuff is honestly, it's for your sake, for your operation's sake, for the viability of your operation. You cannot manage what you do not measure. And I'm sure we've heard this many times before, but I think it's super important. So I'm going to say it again. You cannot manage what you do not measure. So that's why I think we need to keep track of exactly what we have on hand. For the most case, in the current moment here, I'm talking a lot about, say, current assets and current liabilities. The big thing there that's going to affect is ultimately our working capital. Our working capital is a number that your banks are going to be paying close attention to. And then another thing here is all the numbers that I've talked about here, updating all of this information. These are the numbers and the information that your banker will need. They will need this information before it comes time to basically renew your operating loan, or basically just to get all of your accounts updated so they can keep track of your position as well. Well, rather than relying on them to keep track of your position, let's put the power back in your hands. Let's put the power back into, you're actually going to keep that power in control because you're going to know all these numbers, all this information before they do. So I think it's very important for us to keep track of our own financial position, because if you don't, who will? Your banker? Well, can we really rely on them to be honest and with basically our operation here with the numbers that they supposedly know better than you do? No, you're going to know these numbers better than anybody else. So do your best to keep track of this. Do your best to update all this information so that way you can ultimately be impressive and stand out to your banker. And once again, put the power back into your hands, and you have the control back in that conversation whenever it comes time to renewing your operating line, getting an additional credit for some land that you picked up, or trying to purchase land, or trying to maybe purchase some equipment. Anytime you need a loan, this is the numbers that they're going to need, is updated financial numbers. But also there, going back to why do you need all this, is so that way you can manage things better. That way you know exactly what your position is. That way you know what you need to do to, maybe I need to sell some grain coming into the year because for tax purposes, or I need to hold on to some. What do you have to hold on to? What is your inventory? What does that actually look like? So there's multiple reasons that we need to keep track of this or why we need to keep track of this. But truly, at the end of the day, it is for the viability of your operation. So I really hope this is something that makes sense to you. But at the same time, if you want to learn more, if you want to get better at this, if you need help with this, or just even getting started with trying to keep track of some of these numbers, some different tools or programs that can help you keep track of these numbers and make it easy to update these different numbers. Because at the end of the day, like I mentioned before, these are constantly moving, which makes it hard for us to enter these numbers and this information. It makes it sometimes kind of a daunting task. So that's why I think it's important for us to have a system and process that's easy to update. So that way we don't put this off. We don't procrastinate on this. And that's ultimately what I do at Pioneer Farmer. That's what I help with some essential tools. I help business owners gain financial clarity and confidence within their business. So please feel free to reach out if you'd like to learn more, and I would be happy to have that conversation. So I hope this all makes sense to you. I hope this resonates or hits home with you. And once again, reach out if you have any questions. That's all I got for now, and we will catch you next time. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram @GarrettRuskamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.